5 years ago, in 2008, I did something terrible. My whole family, well, not my whole family, but my mom and my brother and me, we did something really, really bad. And I think I was the only one who realized it was bad. I was the holdout, because I didn't want to do it. It was cruel. It was wrong. I knew better. I really knew better. I guess they didn't. Or they were driven by something else. But, ultimately, the three of us, we killed my dad. And I can't ever believe that that's the way it should have happened. The way things happened was so wrong. It was so wrong. It was so unfair. I was bullied, and that's no excuse, because I knew better than they did. The two of them are as illogical as a person could possibly be. Especially my mother, but my brother sides with her a lot. They're real tight, you know, my mom and my brother, and my mom could do nothing but complain about my dad constantly, to everybody, and to me, and to my brother, to everyone, strangers who'd listen to her. She'd complain about my dad. And I remember her saying to me once or twice, I don't know, that she thought she'd be better off if he was gone, meaning dead. And I hated hearing that, because he was my dad. But things happened. He was born on May 18th in 1930. And it was on May 18th that somebody gave him a really, really bad birthday gift. A deadly birthday gift. A stupid, stupid woman fed him poison for his birthday. And that night he got sick. Really, really sick. Really sick. But my mother and the nurses, this was in a nursing home, and he was only there because he couldn't walk, because he was in a wheelchair because of his diabetes. Mentally, he was pretty much all there, you know, but one of the nurses fed him a big plate, a whole big skillet full of wild mushrooms that she'd picked herself. And she cooked them up, and she fed them to him. And I didn't find that out until a lot later, unfortunately. If I'd have been paying attention, there was a point where I did hear about it, but I was so focused on something else that I didn't pay attention, and I didn't realize that had happened, and I should have, because he was still alive at that point. But he got really sick that night, and of course, nobody else can relate the two. He just coincidentally got sick with the very same symptoms of mushroom toxicity. But of course, I had no connection to the fact that he actually ate mushrooms that day. And that he'd never had those symptoms before, also coincidence. that the fact that he got sick and then relapsed, or got better, went through a latency period, then relapsed, went into a coma, and had his liver failure, went into liver failure, went into kidney failure. Everything happened just exactly the way it said it would happen, almost just exactly the way it said it would happen. If you had a toxic, lethal dose of mushrooms. And yet, somehow that's too far-fetched to people to believe. They don't believe it. The only people who believe it are my friends, the few of my friends who have any advanced logical center in their brain, But most people are just like, no, that just sounds too far-fetched. I'm sure he just died of nothing. Coincidences happen, He just happened to die of all the symptoms of mushroom toxicity. It didn't matter that he was fed mushrooms that day from the wild. That really frustrated me, you probably can tell. But, and it made me very angry that this woman took it upon herself to do this. And I think she's very stupid to bring in mushrooms that she found in the wild, that she cooked, and fed him a huge plate of them, which is exactly what she did. And then, when he got sick, she didn't say a word. She did not say a word. She didn't step forward. She didn't say, hey, is it possible that maybe the mushrooms, maybe he had a problem with them? Maybe they were toxic mushrooms, maybe they weren't. But he was a 70-year-old man in somewhat compromised health. He had had heart attacks in the past and a stroke. He was not greatly affected by any of those, at least not so much as a lot of people. They did not cause profound, permanent damage. But nonetheless, it just felt like nobody was watching out for him. And my mother apparently had okayed the mushrooms, or she at least knew about them, because he had left her a message saying, you won't believe what wonderful thing I got for my birthday this morning. Rita from Tender Care brought in a big plate of mushrooms that she cooked in the wild and fed them to me for my birthday. I did get to hear that message once. My dad was in the coma at the time, and I'm kicking myself because I was crying because I was hearing his voice. I thought I probably will never hear his voice again. So I was listening to his voice more than his words. It wasn't until after we buried him that I put two and two together. That and the next time she mentioned the mushrooms, up pops a red flag, and I'm like, what? Somebody fed him mushrooms? Somebody fed him mushrooms that they found? Immediately, it was just like, that isn't smart. And I started looking it up, and I already had his list of symptoms, because the doctors didn't know what happened. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. They never could figure out what was wrong with him. They didn't know what to do. And I started looking down the list of symptoms that I had noted, plus what the doctors had given me, plus this mushroom poisoning symptoms, and it just lined up. It started with hoarseness, and it started in a whole bunch of things, but no throwing up. A lot of times they throw up, but then it says if they don't throw up, then they're in worse shape, because they can't get it out. And he didn't throw up because they gave him, they didn't let him throw up. They gave him anti-nausea medication. So, and the thing is that he ended up in a coma on life support. And the doctors didn't say a word about the fact that we didn't find out until we took him off of life support. We didn't find out until then that in the process of intubating him, they had crushed in all of his bottom teeth. All of these, just laid them back so that they were at a 90-degree angle, pushed in so that they were pointing back at the back of his throat. And he would have been absolutely devastated by that. We noticed blood coming out of his mouth when we first saw him after he was intubated, but they didn't tell us why. And they were, they should have said something about having done that. I know they were trying to save him, and that was first and foremost, that was the most important thing, was saving his life. And he had asked for measures to be taken if something would happen, because he wasn't ready to die. He didn't want to die. And he didn't feel like it was his time yet. And it wasn't really. I mean, certainly as far as his cognition, he wasn't ready to go. But he was in the coma, and my mom asks the infinite question, not the infinite question. I'm sorry. She asks the inevitable damn question that I wish she hadn't asked and I wish they hadn't answered. She asked, once he was in the coma, she asked, well, how long do we have to wait? How long do we wait to see if he's going to wake up? And that stupid doctor said, well, you should know something by next Tuesday. And that was such a mistake. And I spent so much time visiting him in the hospital. But understand, my brother and my mother and my sister-in-law, and I think my niece was there, and I'm not sure about that, and my uncle, who was my dad's brother, one of his brothers, and then his wife, they all came to see him, figuring that this was going to be the last, and nobody would talk to me. They were of a different opinion. They knew I was of the opinion of, let's watch and see what happens. I guess I jumped ahead of myself. There's very, very much a reason why I said we need to sit back and watch, because something happened. We were in there talking on that Tuesday. That next Tuesday. He didn't wake up out of the coma. And that Tuesday came, the day that we're supposed to suddenly pull the plug. Some arbitrary date given by a doctor that my mom takes as the sworn gospel of when we should end his life. And my mother wouldn't have been all too unhappy to have him gone. And I'm not saying that she didn't suffer some, because it was such a shock, I did see her crying, I did see her sobbing, but I also know the things she said, and I know how she treated him, and I know how angry she was at him, and she hated his guts. She might say differently now, but then again she might not. And my brother vicariously hated his guts, because my brother is a mama's boy. My brother is my mama's favorite. And they were a lot alike. And my dad and I were a lot alike. Which was, a bad strike against me for being anything like my dad. But, so, that Tuesday came. My mother, my brother, and I are standing there at the foot of my dad's bed. And there's a doctor there. And we're talking about pulling the plug. And it bothered me that we were talking about it in front of my dad, because who knows what he can hear. My mom was of the assurance that he was already gone. She just kept saying, oh, he's already gone. He's already gone. And first of all, she has no clue about that. She has no idea. And the second thing is, that sentence might have carried more weight if she hadn't said that every time she saw him in any kind of distress. One time he had like motor tics from a medication they gave him, which I recognized because I've seen it in people on that medication. And so he was just kind of like doing these tics that were something he didn't do, but it was the medicine. And she told me that's just what he's doing before he dies. He's dying. And I'm like, no, Mom, he's over-medicated. And I went to the doctors and I insisted that they take him off of the 2 neuroleptic drugs that were doing that. And then he went back to normal. And she was pissed about that. She didn't want me interfering in my dad's care at all. She wanted to believe the doctors, trust the doctors. I don't trust doctors. And I'm certainly not going to stand by and just let them do whatever the hell they want to somebody I love without questioning it. You know, except that's what I ended up doing anyway. And maybe it wasn't exactly that, but I mean, the effect was the same, sort of. Anyway, the thing was, we were standing at the foot of my dad's bed on that Tuesday morning, talking to them about pulling the plug. And I happened to glance over at my dad, and his eyes were open. For the first time since he was in the coma, his eyes were open. They weren't adjusted to us. They were looking straight up, like, if I can do that right, I don't know. And then I was just like, oh my God, he can hear us. I mean, I think he might be able to hear us, what we're saying. And then, you know, we started talking. I mean, I was becoming encouraged seeing him open his eyes. My brother was becoming infuriated with me for finding hope in that. I mean, he was seething about the fact that I seemed hopeful about that. And the doctors seemed perplexed by it. Well, we looked over at him again, and that time his eyes were down. He didn't have control of his eyes, but he was attempting to move them. And this time he looked like this. So it was kind of like he was going like this. And I'll tell you one thing that I know from waking up in recovery room. They had some kind of medication IV in me, and I couldn't move. And I couldn't fall asleep, but I couldn't really stay awake, and I just felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. It was a horrible feeling. And the only thing I could try to do, and nobody came over for a long time, but when this nurse finally came over, I took every ounce of anything I had in me to take my arm and just kind of swing it like that. And I didn't have any control over it. It was just like it was just a wild swing. But I managed to hit the IV bag, and she figured out that I wanted her to take me off the IV, because I knew that's what was keeping me from waking up. And I couldn't see either. I couldn't control my eyes. And I immediately thought that must be what's happening with him. That it takes so much concentration and strength to fight a drug that's in your system. But my brother just got more and more furious. The doctors were, my mother and brother were like, well, they were still planning to kill him. It didn't matter that he opened his eyes. You know why? Because it was Tuesday. Here we were trying to get him to open his eyes the whole week before. But since it was Tuesday was death day, and that's